On Beale Street in Memphis, a 17-year-old girl was trying to sell her father's piano for $200. She'd been sitting there for 4 hours in 98-degree heat, but not a single person had stopped until that man in the black leather jacket walked by. But nobody knew that moment was being recorded by a local news crew, and what would happen in the next 20 minutes would change not only that girl's life, but the lives of 12 million people who'd watched the footage. Because Elvis Presley was on Beale Street that day in August 1974, and he was about to prove that the king's greatest gift wasn't his voice, it was his heart. The temperature was hovering around 98 degrees, and the sidewalk shimmered with heat waves. Beale Street was alive as always, the birthplace of the blues, where music poured out of every doorway. Neon signs advertised live shows, record shops displayed albums in dusty windows, and street musicians competed for spare change from tourists. The air smelled like barbecue smoke, hot asphalt, and 100 years of music history. But right there, in front of A. Schwab's General Store, next to the spot where B.B. King used to busk decades earlier, sat a 17-year-old girl. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She wore a faded yellow sundress that had been washed so many times the color had nearly disappeared, white canvas sneakers with holes in the toes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Beside her, carefully positioned on the sidewalk, sat an old upright piano, a Kimball from 1952, its wood finish dulled by time but still dignified. And in Sarah's hands was a piece of cardboard that read, in careful handwriting, "For sale, $200. Sarah's story wasn't the kind that belonged on Beale Street, at least not the tourist version of Beale Street. This wasn't about chasing fame or following dreams. This was about survival. Sarah's father, James Mitchell, had died 7 months earlier from a heart attack. He was only 44 years old. One minute, he was playing piano at a Sunday service. The next minute, he was gone, just like that. James Mitchell had been a session musician in his younger days, never famous, but skilled enough to play backup for Sun Records in the late 50s and early 60s. He'd played on tracks that never became hits, worked with artists whose names nobody remembered, but he'd been there, in those legendary studios, breathing the same air as the men who'd created rock and roll. After the session work dried up, James had worked as a piano teacher, giving lessons to neighborhood kids for $10 an hour. It was barely enough, but it was honest work, and James Mitchell was an honest man. Sarah's mother, Dorothy Mitchell, was 45 years old and had spent the last 20 years raising Sarah and her 2 younger brothers while working part-time at a fabric store. After James died, she'd taken on full-time work, but the $900 a month she earned wasn't enough for rent, 3 kids, utilities, and food. The life insurance policy James thought he had turned out to be lapsed. He'd missed payments during a slow month 2 years earlier and never caught up. The eviction notice had come last week. They had until September 1st to come up with $600 in back rent, or they'd be on the street. Dorothy had been taking extra shifts. Sarah had been babysitting every night after school. Her brothers had been collecting bottles for the deposit money. They'd scraped together $400. They needed $200 more. That's why Sarah had convinced her mother to let her try to sell the piano. It was the only thing they owned that was worth anything. The piano had been her father's most prized possession, not because it was expensive, but because it had been his mother's piano, passed down to him when she died. James had taught Sarah to play on that piano. Every afternoon after school, father and daughter would sit side by side on that bench, his hands guiding hers over the keys. Sarah's favorite song had been "Can't Help Falling in Love." Her father would sing it while she played, his voice not professional but warm and full of love. The last time they'd played it together was 3 days before he died. Sarah remembered every detail, the way the afternoon light came through the window, the way her father smiled when she hit the difficult chord progression correctly, the way he'd said, "You're going to be better than your old man ever was, sweetheart." The piano was the last physical piece of her father Sarah had. But she was 17 years old, and she understood what her mother wouldn't say out loud. You can't sleep in a piano. You can't eat memories. Sometimes, survival meant letting go of the things you loved most. Sarah had been sitting there since 10 a.m. It was now 2 p.m. Hundreds of people had passed by. Some had stopped to look. A few had asked questions. Does it work? Can you deliver it? Will you take $50? But nobody had seriously considered buying a full-size upright piano from a teenage girl on a sidewalk. Some had taken photos, probably thinking it was some kind of art installation. One man had laughed and said, "Good luck with that, honey." Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she wouldn't cry. Her father had always told her that Mitchell women were strong. "We bend, but we don't break," he'd say. But right now, Sarah felt like she was about to shatter. It was 2:17 p.m. when Elvis Presley turned onto Beale Street. Elvis was alone that day, which was unusual. Normally he traveled with an entourage, security, friends, hangers-on. But sometimes even kings needed to escape. He'd driven himself from Graceland in his Stutz Blackhawk, wearing dark sunglasses and a black leather jacket despite the heat, and he'd parked 3 blocks away just to walk, to remember. Elvis was 39 years old. His comeback from the '68 special had revitalized his career, and he'd spent the last few years performing in Vegas to sold-out crowds. He'd made millions. He'd bought Cadillacs for strangers, paid off people's mortgages on a whim, handed out money to anyone who looked like they needed it. But lately, Elvis had been thinking about the past, about the Lauderdale Courts housing project where he'd grown up, about his mother Gladys, and how they'd been so poor that sometimes all they had to eat was cornbread and beans. About the day he'd bought her that pink Cadillac, and how her face had lit up like Christmas morning. Elvis walked slowly, looking at the buildings, remembering. Beale Street had changed, but it still felt like home. This was where he'd come as a teenager, sneaking into clubs to hear the blues musicians play, absorbing everything, learning the music that would become the foundation of everything he'd create. Then he saw her, the girl with the piano and the cardboard sign. Elvis stopped. At first, it was just curiosity. You didn't see pianos on sidewalks every day. But as he looked closer, he saw something that made his heart ache. The girl's face. She wasn't begging. She wasn't performing. She was just sitting there with quiet desperation, hoping for a miracle. And Elvis, who'd been that kid once, the poor kid hoping for a miracle, felt something shift inside him. He walked over. Sarah looked up and saw a man in dark sunglasses and a leather jacket. She didn't recognize him. She jumped to her feet, hope sparking in her chest. "Afternoon," Elvis said in that familiar Memphis drawl, soft and polite. "That's a mighty fine piano you got there. You really selling it?" Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It's a Kimball, 1952. It's in perfect working condition. My father took really good care of it. It's only $200. Elvis walked around the piano slowly, running his hand along the wood. Then he sat down on the bench, right there on the sidewalk, and lifted the keyboard cover. His fingers touched the keys gently, testing them. They were perfectly in tune. Someone had loved this piano. "You mind if I play something?" Elvis asked, looking up at Sarah. "Of course not, sir. Please." Elvis's fingers moved over the keys and he began to play. Not one of his songs, something older, bluesier. A melody that seemed to rise up from Beale Street itself. People started to slow down, drawn by the music. A small crowd began to form, but nobody recognized the man in the sunglasses yet. When Elvis finished, he turned to Sarah. "Your daddy teach you to play?" Sarah's voice caught. "Yes, sir. He was a piano teacher. He was really good." "Was?" Elvis asked gently. Sarah took a breath. "He died. 7 months ago. Heart attack." Elvis was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "So why you selling his piano, sweetheart? This is a beautiful instrument. Your daddy clearly treasured it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "We need the money. My mom and me and my brothers. We're going to lose our apartment if we don't pay the rent. I've been trying everything, babysitting, selling my things, but it's not enough. The piano is the only thing we have that's worth anything." Elvis felt his throat tighten. He was staring at his own past. Different girl, different decade, but the same story. Poor family, dead parent, kids trying to survive. He took off his sunglasses so Sarah could see his eyes. They were blue and kind, with crow's feet at the corners that came from a lifetime of smiling. "Let me tell you something, young lady," Elvis said quietly. "I grew up not far from here, Tupelo, Mississippi. We were so poor we didn't have a pot to piss in. My daddy worked every job he could find, and sometimes it still wasn't enough. When I was 13, we got evicted. Had to move to Memphis with nothing but what we could carry. I remember my mama crying, trying to hide it from me, but I heard her." Sarah listened, captivated. This stranger understood, really understood. "So I get it," Elvis continued. "I get what you're doing. You're trying to save your family. That takes guts. That takes heart. Your daddy would be proud of you." "Thank you, sir," Sarah whispered. Did you ever have to sell something you loved?" Elvis smiled sadly. "Didn't have nothing worth selling, honey. But I remember wanting to, remember feeling helpless. And I remember thinking that if I ever made it, if I ever got out of that hole, I'd never forget what it felt like." He stood up from the piano bench and pulled out his wallet. Sarah watched as he opened it and pulled out bills, not ones or fives, but hundreds. He counted out 10 of them. $1,000. Sarah's eyes went wide. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Sir, no, it's only $200. I can't." Elvis pressed the money into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "This ain't for the piano. This is for you and your mama and your brothers, for rent, for food, for whatever you need." "But I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to know you to see that you're trying to do right by your family," Elvis said, "and that's all that matters." "But then you don't want the piano?" Sarah asked, confused. Elvis crouched down so he was at eye level with her. He put his hands on her shoulders gently. "Listen to me carefully, sweetheart. I want you to keep that piano, because that piano isn't just wood and strings. That's your daddy. That's every lesson he taught you, every song you played together, every moment you shared. One day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, you're going to sit down at that piano, and you're going to play. And you're going to remember him, and you're going to feel like he's right there with you. Because music doesn't die, Sarah. People do, but music lives forever." Sarah couldn't hold it back anymore. She started crying, deep, shaking sobs that she'd been holding in for 7 months. Elvis pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Cry it out. You've earned it. You've been strong for everybody else. Be sad for a minute. It's okay." That's when someone in the growing crowd recognized him. A woman gasped, "Oh my God, that's Elvis. That's Elvis Presley." Suddenly everything changed. Phones weren't common in 1974, but the local news crew that had been filming a segment about Beale Street turned their camera toward the commotion. People started running over, shouting, reaching out. Elvis stood up, instinctively moving to shield Sarah from the sudden rush. He raised his hands, smiling that famous smile. All right, y'all calm down now," he said, his voice warm and commanding. "Just having a conversation with my friend here." But the crowd was growing. Voices called out, "Elvis, can I get an autograph? Elvis, what are you doing here? Elvis, I love you." Elvis turned back to Sarah one last time. He took her hand and squeezed it. "You keep that piano, you hear me," he said. "And you play it. Every day. Because your daddy's listening, and he wants to hear you play." Are you really Elvis Presley?" Sarah asked, still stunned. Elvis laughed. "Last time I checked. But that don't matter right now. What matters is you're going to be okay. You and your family. You're going to be just fine." Security had arrived, trying to manage the crowd. Elvis gave Sarah one last smile, patted her shoulder, and then he was gone, swallowed up by the crowd and the chaos, leaving Sarah standing there with $1,000 in her hand, and her father's piano still beside her. That evening, when Sarah got home to their small apartment, Her mother was at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her, stress written all over her face. When Sarah walked in and put the money on the table, 10 crisp $100 bills, Dorothy Mitchell froze. "Sarah Rose Mitchell," she said slowly. "Where did this money come from?" Sarah told her everything. Beale Street, the piano, the man in the leather jacket, the things he'd said, and how he'd turned out to be Elvis Presley. Dorothy's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, fear, disbelief, and finally, tears. "Baby," Dorothy said, pulling Sarah into her arms, "your father would be so incredibly proud of you." That night, for the first time in 7 months, Sarah sat down at her father's piano. Her fingers found the keys and she played "Can't Help Falling in Love." It wasn't perfect. Her fingers were stiff and she missed a few notes. But she played. And as she played, she could almost hear her father's voice singing along. 3 days later, Sarah's story exploded. The news footage of Elvis with the girl and the piano aired locally, then got picked up nationally. Within a week, the video had been seen by 12 million people. The story touched something deep in America's heart. The king of rock and roll, the richest entertainer in the world, stopping to help a struggling teenager on the same street where he'd once dreamed his own dreams. A GoFundMe campaign started without Sarah's knowledge. The first day, $3,000 came in. By the end of the week, it was $25,000. People from all over the country sent money, sent letters, sent prayers. The Mitchell family was no longer facing eviction. The bills were paid, and there was enough left over for Sarah's brothers to go to the dentist for the first time in 3 years. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks after their encounter, Sarah's mother received a phone call. The man on the other end identified himself as Elvis's attorney. Dorothy's heart stopped. She thought something was wrong, that maybe Elvis wanted the money back. But the lawyer explained, Elvis and his manager had set up an education fund in Sarah's name. $25,000 specifically designated for music education, piano lessons, music theory, whatever she needed. It would be waiting for her when she was ready. Elvis hadn't told anyone about it. He hadn't called the press. He'd just done it, quietly, the way he did so many things. When Dorothy hung up the phone, she cried for an hour. Sarah held her mother and cried too, but this time they were tears of gratitude, tears of hope. That fall, Sarah started proper piano lessons with a teacher from the Memphis College of Music. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours, her father's piano carrying her voice through those old keys. Music became her refuge, her passion, her way of keeping her father alive. 6 months later, Sarah's high school held a talent show. She'd wanted to participate, but stage fright had almost kept her away. Her mother encouraged her. "Your daddy would want you to play, and so would Elvis." Sarah walked onto that stage with her father's Kimball piano. The school had allowed her to bring it, and she played "Can't Help Falling in Love." Her voice was small at first, wavering with nerves, but it grew stronger with each note. And when she finished, the auditorium erupted in applause that lasted for 5 full minutes. Someone recorded the performance and posted it on local television. Somehow, the video found its way to Elvis, and one morning, Sarah woke up to find that Elvis Presley had sent a message through his fan club newsletter. "Saw young Sarah Mitchell perform last night. That girl's going to change the world one day. I knew it the moment I met her. Keep playing, Sarah. Your daddy's watching, and he's so proud, and so am I." EP. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that one act of kindness can change everything, remember to like and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that there are still good people in this world. Because sometimes the king of rock and roll is also the king of human kindness. And sometimes $200 worth of wood and strings is worth more than all the money in the world.